Billionaire Dante Ashford told me to dance the tango or forget about marrying his son. I was terrified. I'd never danced professionally in my life. But what happened next in that ballroom changed everything, and I mean everything. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. Let me back up for just a second because you need to understand who we're dealing with here. My name is Celeste Rivera, and 6 months ago I was just a 28-year-old elementary school teacher living in Phoenix, grading papers and worrying about whether I had enough money to fix my car's air conditioning. I taught 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary, and honestly, I loved every chaotic minute of it. My kids called me Miss C, and I was perfectly content with my small, simple life. Then I met Felix Ashford at Murphy's Coffee House on 5th Street. I was there on a Sunday afternoon, red pen in hand, working through a stack of math tests. This guy walks up and asks if he can share my table because the place was packed. He was wearing jeans and a faded t-shirt from some charity run, nothing fancy. We started talking, and I had no idea his last name was worth $3 billion. Felix is 30, with kind eyes and this way of listening that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. He's an architect, but not the kind who builds mansions for rich people. He designs affordable housing and community centers. He volunteers at homeless shelters on weekends. He drives a Honda Civic that's older than some of my students. For 6 months, he was just Felix to me, this incredible man who brought me coffee and made me laugh and held my hand during scary movies. But Felix Ashford isn't just anyone. His father is Dante Ashford, the tech mogul who owns half of Silicon Valley and has a reputation for crushing anyone who gets in his way. Dante built his empire from nothing after immigrating from Argentina, and now he controls his family with the same ruthless precision he uses to run his companies. He's 55, silver-haired, and has the kind of presence that makes grown executives tremble. Felix's mother, Vivienne, used to be a professional ballet dancer before Dante swept her off her feet 30 years ago. She's elegant and soft-spoken, but there's something sad in her eyes, like she gave up more than just her career when she married into the Ashford world. When Felix proposed to me 3 weeks ago during our evening walk through Papago Park, I said yes without hesitation. But then he got this worried look and said we needed to get his father's blessing first. That's when I learned the truth about the Ashford family rules. Dante has to approve every major decision in his children's lives, especially marriages. And he's never approved of anyone Felix has brought home. Felix tried to prepare me for the meeting, but how do you prepare for someone like Dante Ashford? This is a man who once bought out a competitor's company just because their CEO had insulted him at a charity gala. He's known for testing people, for finding their weak spots and pressing until they break. My background couldn't be more different from theirs. I grew up with my mom, Rosa Rivera, in a tiny apartment near downtown Phoenix. Dad left when I was 8, and Mom worked double shifts as a seamstress to keep us afloat. She taught me Spanish lullabies and how to make tamales from scratch, and that dignity doesn't come from money, it comes from how you treat people. She's the strongest person I know, but she's never owned a passport or eaten at a restaurant that doesn't have prices on the menu. I should have known Dante Ashford wouldn't just sit down and get to know me over dinner. Men like him don't do simple. They do tests, they do power plays, they do whatever it takes to prove they're in control. But standing in that mansion, looking at Felix's worried face and feeling Dante's cold stare, I had no idea what was coming. I thought maybe he'd grill me about my finances or my family or my plans for the future. I never imagined he'd challenge me to dance my way into his family. That night changed everything about how I see myself, how I understand love, and what it really means to fight for something you believe in. The morning Felix and I decided to tell his parents about our engagement, I woke up with butterflies doing gymnastics in my stomach. We'd been putting off this conversation for 2 weeks, ever since he'd gotten down on one knee in Papago Park with his grandmother's ring. Felix kept saying his father would come around, that Dante just needed time to see how happy we were together. But I could tell Felix was nervous too, the way he kept checking his phone and running his hands through his hair. Maybe we should wait another month, I suggested over breakfast at our favorite diner. Give him more time to get used to the idea that you're serious about someone. Felix reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Celeste, we've been together 6 months. He needs to know that you're not going anywhere, that this isn't some phase I'm going through. 6 months. It felt like a lifetime and a heartbeat all at once. I could still remember that first conversation at Murphy's Coffee House, how Felix had apologized for interrupting my grading but said he'd been watching me work for 20 minutes and was impressed by my focus. He'd bought me a refill without asking what I wanted and somehow got it exactly right. 2 creams, 1 sugar, and a dash of cinnamon. You know what I love about you? He'd said that first day. You care about something bigger than yourself. He was talking about how I'd been writing encouraging notes on my students' math tests, even the ones with wrong answers. Look, Tommy tried a new strategy here. I'd written on one. Maria, your work is so neat and organized. Felix noticed details like that. He noticed that I stayed late to help kids who were struggling, that I spent my own money on classroom supplies, that I genuinely celebrated every small victory my students achieved. Our relationship had grown so naturally. Friday night movies at my apartment, where we'd order pizza and Felix would let me pick romantic comedies he pretended to hate but secretly enjoyed. Saturday morning hikes in the desert, where he'd point out different cacti and I'd tell him stories about my students. Sunday volunteer shifts at St. Vincent's, where Felix served meals and I helped kids with homework in the family area. He fit into my world effortlessly. My mom adored him from the moment he showed up at our door with flowers and asked if he could help her fix her sewing machine. He spoke Spanish with her, not perfectly, but enough to make her smile. He ate 3 helpings of her mole and asked for the recipe. When she pulled out photo albums, he listened to every story about my childhood with genuine interest. Your mother raised an incredible woman, he told me later that night. I can see where you get your strength. But Felix's world was different. The few times he'd mentioned his family, he'd grown quiet. His father was demanding, controlling. His mother was lovely, but had learned not to challenge Dante's decisions. Felix had spent years trying to live up to impossible expectations, and I was starting to understand that our relationship represented his first real act of independence. He's going to test you, Felix warned me as we drove toward the Ashford estate that evening. It's what he does. He tested every friend I ever brought home, every business partner, every person who's ever wanted anything from our family. What kind of tests? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Felix was quiet. For a long moment. He finds what matters most to you, and then he finds a way to make you choose between that and what you think you want from him. The Ashford mansion sat on 20 acres in Paradise Valley, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows. It looked like something from an architecture magazine, beautiful but cold. As we pulled through the gates, I thought about my mom's little apartment with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in my students' artwork. This place probably cost more than my entire neighborhood. Remember, Felix said as we walked to the front door. No matter what happens in there, I love you. That doesn't change based on his opinion. But even as he said it, I could see the tension in his shoulders. Felix loved his father despite everything, and he wanted Dante's approval more than he cared to admit. This wasn't just about me proving myself worthy of the Ashford name. This was about Felix finally standing up to a man who'd controlled every aspect of his life since birth. The front door opened before we could knock. Dante Ashford stood there in an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his dark eyes already sizing me up. He was shorter than I'd expected, but commanded the space around him like he owned the air itself. Felix, he said warmly, embracing his son. Then his gaze shifted to me, and his smile became something sharper. And this must be the famous elementary school teacher. The way he said it made my profession sound like a hobby rather than a calling. Walking into the Ashford mansion felt like entering a museum where I wasn't supposed to touch anything. The foyer alone was bigger than my entire apartment, with marble floors so polished I could see my reflection and a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than I made in 2 years. Original paintings hung on the walls, the kind you see in textbooks about famous artists. Vivian appeared at the top of a curved staircase, elegant in a way that seemed effortless. She glided down wearing a simple black dress that somehow looked like it cost a fortune, her graying hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. "You must be Celeste," she said, her voice warm but careful. "Felix has told us so much about you." She embraced me gently, and I caught a whiff of expensive perfume mixed with something sadder, like she was trying to apologize for what was coming. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have seated 20 people. The three of us sat clustered at one end of a mahogany table that stretched into shadows, fine china and crystal glasses catching the light from another elaborate chandelier. I'd never eaten off plates that thin or used silverware that heavy. For the first 20 minutes, Dante played the perfect host. He asked about my work at Lincoln Elementary, nodding thoughtfully when I described my third graders and their latest projects. But there was something predatory in his attention, like he was filing away every detail for later use. "Teaching," he mused, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "Such a noble profession. Tell me, what does a teacher earn these days in Phoenix? 40,000? 45? Felix tensed beside me. "Dad, that's not really—" "I'm genuinely curious," Dante interrupted smoothly. "I believe in understanding the economics of any situation." "Enough to live on," I replied, meeting his gaze. "Enough to do work that matters." Dante smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Though I imagine it must be challenging, making ends meet on such a modest income. No judgment, naturally. We can't all be fortunate enough to build empires." The conversation continued like this, Dante asking innocent questions that felt like tiny cuts. How long had I lived in my apartment? Did I have student loans? What did my mother do for work? Each question delivered with polite interest, but designed to highlight exactly how different my world was from theirs. Vivian tried to steer the conversation toward safer topics, asking about my students and my hobbies, but Dante kept circling back to what he clearly saw as my inadequacies. Felix grew quieter with each exchange, his jaw tight, his hand gripping his wine glass like he wanted to throw it. After dessert, Dante stood and walked to a sideboard lined with expensive bottles. "Felix tells me you two are quite serious," he said casually, pouring himself a scotch. "That's amusing." The word hit like a slap. Felix shot to his feet. "Dad, don't." But Dante was just getting started. He turned back to us, his expression shifting from polite host to corporate predator. "Do you know what separates our family from people like you, Miss Rivera? Culture, refinement, passion. These aren't things you can learn from a textbook or pick up at a community college." "I went to Arizona State," I said quietly. But he waved my words away like they were irrelevant. "My father came to America from Buenos Aires with nothing but talent and fire in his blood. He could dance the tango like it was written in his DNA. He built a shipping company, then an import business, then a tech empire. But he never forgot where he came from or what made him extraordinary." Dante moved closer, his voice growing more intense. "The tango isn't just a dance in our family, Miss Rivera. It's our heritage. Our proof that we understand passion, artistry, the difference between existing and truly living." Felix stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous. Celeste doesn't need to prove anything to you, doesn't she?" Dante's smile was sharp as a blade. "Here's what I propose. A simple test. If Miss Rivera can dance the tango with the skill and passion worthy of the Ashford name, she has my blessing to marry my son. If she cannot, then she walks away from this family forever." The silence that followed felt like falling off a cliff. Vivian's face went pale. Felix looked like he'd been punched. "You can't be serious," Felix said. "I'm completely serious." 1 week to prepare. I'll arrange for professional instruction naturally. The performance will take place here, in our ballroom, with appropriate witnesses to ensure fairness. I found my voice finally. "And if I refuse?" Dante's smile widened. "Then you can leave now and save us all the time and effort. Unless, of course, you lack the courage to fight for what you claim to love." The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown at my feet. This wasn't about dancing. This was about power, about Dante proving he could control his son's life, about putting me in my place once and for all. Felix grabbed my hand. "Celeste, you don't have to do this. We can leave right now. But as I looked at Dante's smug expression, something hardened inside me. He expected me to run. He wanted me to crumble under the pressure and prove his point about my inadequacy. Every condescending question, every subtle insult, every moment he'd made me feel small in this ridiculous mansion had led to this moment. I accept, I heard myself say. Dante's eyebrows rose slightly like he hadn't expected me to call his bluff. Excellent, he said. 1 week, Miss Rivera. Don't disappoint us. Felix didn't speak to me for the entire drive home. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white, and I could practically feel the anger radiating off him. When we finally reached my apartment, he followed me inside and exploded. "What were you thinking?" he shouted, pacing around my tiny living room like a caged animal. "You don't understand what you just agreed to. My father doesn't make deals, Celeste. He sets traps." "I understand perfectly," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He wants to humiliate me. He wants to prove I don't belong in your world." "Exactly. So why are you walking right into it?" I sank onto my couch, suddenly exhausted. "Because if I had walked away tonight, he would have won anyway. At least this way, I have a chance to fight back." Felix stopped pacing and looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Fight back? Celeste, you've never taken a dance lesson in your life. He's going to bring in professional instructors and judges. He's probably already planning the guest list for your public failure." The truth of his words hit me like cold water. What had I done? In my anger and wounded pride, I'd agreed to something impossible. But as I sat there, feeling the weight of Felix's disappointment and my own fear, something my mother had always told me echoed in my mind. "Mia, when someone tries to make you feel small, you have two choices. You can shrink to fit their expectations, or you can grow big enough to change them." The next morning, Dante's assistant called with details about my dance instructor. Miguel Santos ran a professional dance studio in Scottsdale and had trained performers for Broadway shows and international competitions. The first lesson was scheduled for that afternoon. Felix wanted to come with me, but I told him no. "This is something I have to do myself," I said. "If I'm going to fail, at least let me fail on my own terms." Miguel's studio was intimidating, all mirrors and polished floors and framed photos of elegant dancers frozen in perfect poses. Miguel himself was in his 50s, compact and precise, with the kind of posture that screamed decades of discipline. "So you're Dante Ashford's project," he said, looking me up and down with professional assessment. "He told me you have one, weak to learn the tango well enough to perform for his friends." I told him he was crazy. "Thanks for the confidence boost," I muttered. "I'm not trying to discourage you," Miguel said. "I'm trying to be realistic. The tango isn't just steps and technique. It's passion, storytelling, connection. Most of my students train for years before they're ready to perform publicly." He put on music and demonstrated a basic tango sequence, his movements fluid and commanding. "Show me what you know," he said. What I knew was embarrassing. I stumbled through some awkward steps I'd seen in movies, my body stiff and uncertain. Miguel watched with the patience of someone who'd seen every kind of beginner disaster. "Stop," he said after 2 minutes. "You're thinking too much. The tango isn't a math problem to solve. It's a conversation between your body and the music." For the next 3 hours, Miguel worked with me on basic posture, footwork, and something he called the embrace. By the end of the session, I was sweating, frustrated, and convinced I'd made a terrible mistake. "Same time tomorrow," Miguel said as I gathered my things. "And Miss Rivera? Dante Ashford may have arranged for these lessons, but he's not paying for my honesty. You want my advice? Stop trying to dance his dance. Find your own." That night, Felix came over with takeout Chinese food and found me practicing basic steps in my living room, using a chair as a partner. "You look ridiculous," he said, but his tone was gentle. "I feel ridiculous," I admitted. "Miguel says I need to find my own style, but I don't even know what that means." Felix set down the food and walked over to me. "May I?" He held out his hand. I let him pull me into his arms, and we swayed together to no music except the rhythm of our own breathing. This felt natural, comfortable. This felt like us. "When I proposed to you," Felix said softly, "it wasn't because you fit some image in my head of what my wife should be. It was because you're brave enough to care about things that matter, even when it's hard. You fight for your students every day. You fought for your mom when she was sick. You've been fighting for us since the moment we met. This is different, I whispered. No, it's not. It's just a different battlefield. The next few days blurred together in a cycle of teaching during the day and dancing at night. Miguel pushed me harder each session, and slowly, something started to click. Not the technical perfection he was trying to teach me, but something deeper. On the fourth day, something unexpected happened. Vivian appeared at the studio. "I hope you don't mind," she said quietly. "I wanted to see how you were progressing." Miguel welcomed her warmly. Clearly they knew each other. As I ran through my routine, I noticed Vivian watching with tears in her eyes. "Beautiful," she whispered when I finished. Then she approached me with something fierce in her expression. "Dante destroyed my dreams once too," she said. "I was a principal dancer with the Phoenix Ballet when I met him. He convinced me that love meant choosing him over everything else I cared about. I've regretted that choice for 30 years. She gripped my hands. "But I see something in you that I lost long ago. A fire he's underestimated. Don't just dance his dance, Celeste. Dance yours. Show him what real passion looks like." That night, everything changed. I stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to be true. The night of the performance, I stood in the guest bedroom of the Ashford mansion, staring at myself in a full-length mirror. Miguel had helped me choose a deep red dress that moved like liquid when I walked, and Vivian had insisted on lending me her grandmother's earrings for luck. But all the beautiful accessories in the world couldn't hide the terror in my eyes. Through the bedroom door, I could hear voices drifting up from the ballroom below. Dante had invited 30 of his closest friends and business associates, all of them wealthy, influential people who moved in circles where a failed elementary school teacher would provide excellent dinner party gossip for months to come. Felix appeared in the doorway, devastatingly handsome in his black suit, but looking like he was attending a funeral rather than a dance performance. "We can still leave," he said quietly. "Right now. We can walk out of here and never look back." For a moment, I almost said yes. The easy path stretched out in front of me, safe and familiar. But then I thought about my students, about how I taught them that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. "I can't," I said. "Not anymore. This stopped being about your father's approval days ago. Then what is it about?" I took a deep breath, trying to find words for something I was only beginning to understand myself. "It's about proving that worth doesn't come from bank accounts or pedigrees or fitting into someone else's definition of acceptable. It's about showing him that there are different kinds of strength, different kinds of beauty." Felix kissed my forehead gently. "I love you exactly as you are. Win or lose tonight, that doesn't change." But as he said it, I could see the worry in his eyes. He knew his father better than anyone, knew that Dante didn't make challenges he expected to lose. Miguel appeared behind Felix, carrying his phone, connected to a portable speaker. "Ready, Celeste?" I nodded, though ready felt like an overstatement. The ballroom was spectacular, all crystal and gold and soft lighting that made everything look like a fairy tale. But the 30 faces turned toward me as I descended the stairs belonged to people who clearly expected to be entertained by my failure. I recognized some of them from magazine covers and news articles. Tech moguls, real estate developers, socialites who treated charity galas like competitive sports. Dante stood near the far wall, impeccable in his tuxedo, wearing the satisfied expression of a man who'd already won. Vivian sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Miguel took his position by the speaker and looked at me questioningly. I nodded. The first notes of La Comparsita filled the room, and something inside me shifted. All the technical instruction from the past week faded away, replaced by something deeper and more instinctive. I wasn't Celeste Rivera, struggling teacher trying to prove herself worthy of a billionaire's son. I was every woman who'd ever been told she wasn't enough, every person who'd fought for love against impossible odds. I began to move. The tango Miguel had taught me was precise, controlled, designed to impress judges and win competitions. But the dance that poured out of me that night was something else entirely. It was the story of my mother working double shifts to keep us afloat, her hands bleeding from needle pricks but never complaining. It was the joy I felt when one of my students finally grasped a difficult concept, their face lighting up with understanding. It was the moment Felix first told me he loved me, how it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. Every movement was raw truth. I danced the loneliness of growing up without a father, the pride of earning my teaching degree. Against all odds, the fierce protectiveness I felt for everyone I loved. I danced my refusal to be ashamed of who I was or where I came from. The room had gone completely silent except for the music. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, frozen by something they hadn't expected to witness. As the music built to its crescendo, I caught Dante's eye across the room. His smug expression had vanished, replaced by something I couldn't quite read. Shock, maybe, or recognition. When the final notes faded, the silence stretched on forever. I stood in the center of that opulent ballroom, chest heaving, completely exposed but somehow more myself than I'd ever been. Then Vivian rose to her feet and began to applaud, tears streaming down her face. "Bravo," she whispered. And then, louder, "Bravo." One by one, the other guests joined her until the room erupted in applause. But I only had eyes for Dante, who was walking toward me with measured steps. He stopped directly in front of me, his dark eyes searching my face. "That wasn't the tango I expected," he said quietly, his voice carrying only to me despite the crowd around us. I lifted my chin. No, it wasn't. It was better. His admission seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised me. "You didn't dance to impress me or my friends. You danced to honor yourself, your story, everything that made you who you are. That takes more courage than I gave you credit for." He extended his hand formally. "Welcome to the family, Celeste." But as I shook his hand, I realized the victory wasn't in winning his approval. It was in discovering that I'd never needed it in the first place. The weeks following that night in the ballroom felt like living in a different world. Dante, who had spent our first meeting cataloging my inadequacies, now asked genuine questions about my teaching methods and listened to my answers with the same intensity he brought to board meetings. The transformation was so complete that Vivian pulled me aside one afternoon and whispered, "In 30 years of marriage, I've never seen anyone change his mind so thoroughly about anything. But the real change wasn't in Dante. It was in me." I returned to Lincoln Elementary the Monday after the performance with a confidence I'd never possessed before. When the principal mentioned budget cuts that might eliminate our after-school tutoring program, I didn't just nod and accept it like I would have before. Instead, I walked into his office with a detailed proposal for fundraising events and community partnerships. When he tried to dismiss my ideas as unrealistic, I looked him in the eye and said, "Let me prove you wrong." My students noticed the difference immediately. "Miss C, you seem different," 8-year-old Marcus said during reading time. "Like taller or something." He wasn't wrong. I had grown taller, not physically, but in every way that mattered. I'd learned that respect isn't something you earn by shrinking yourself to fit other people's expectations. It's something you claim by standing fully in your own truth. Felix and I set our wedding date for the following spring. 6 months felt right, long enough to plan something beautiful, but not so long that we'd lose the momentum of this new chapter we'd started together. Felix had changed too, I realized. Watching me stand up to his father had given him permission to do the same. "I told Dad I'm leaving the family business," he announced one evening over dinner at my apartment. "I'm going to start my own firm, focus on affordable housing projects." "What did he say?" I asked, expecting stories of arguments and ultimatums. Felix grinned. "He said it was about time I showed some backbone. Then he offered to be my first investor." The wedding planning process revealed just how much the family dynamics had shifted. Dante insisted on paying for everything, but instead of dictating choices, he asked what we wanted and made it happen. When I mentioned that my mother had always dreamed of seeing me married in the cathedral where she'd been baptized, he arranged for the ceremony to be held at St. Augustine's in downtown Phoenix, A simple stone church that couldn't have been more different from the country club venues he probably preferred. "Your mother raised an extraordinary woman," he told me during one of our planning meetings. "The least we can do is honor her dreams." The night before the wedding, Dante knocked on the door of the bridal suite at the hotel where my mom and I were staying. He stood in the hallway holding a small wrapped box, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I wanted to give you this," he said, handing me the package. It belonged to my mother. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with tiny charms representing different stages of life: a book, a heart, a house, a child's shoe. She wore it on her wedding day, Dante explained. She said it reminded her that marriage isn't just about the beginning of love, but about all the chapters you write together. I felt tears prick my eyes. "Dante, this is too much." "No," he said firmly. "It's not nearly enough. You've given me back my son, and more than that, you've reminded me what real strength looks like. I spent so many years thinking power meant making people smaller so I could feel bigger. You showed me that real power comes from lifting others up." The wedding day itself was perfect, not because everything went according to plan, but because it was filled with authentic joy. My third graders served as flower girls and ring bearers, their excitement infectious as they marched down the aisle with varying degrees of coordination. My mother cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing her eyes with the handkerchief Vivian had given her. But the moment I'll remember forever came during the reception. As the band played their first song, Dante approached me with a formal bow. "May I have this dance?" he asked. We moved onto the dance floor together, and as we swayed to the music, he spoke quietly near my ear. "Thank you for teaching an old fool that worth isn't measured by bank accounts or social standing. You've shown me that the most valuable things in life can't be bought, only earned through courage and authenticity." "You don't have to thank me," I said. "You gave me something too. You challenged me to prove to myself who I really was." As we danced, I looked around the room at all the people who'd come to celebrate with us. Felix was spinning one of my students around the dance floor while she giggled with delight. My mother was deep in conversation with Vivienne, the two women discovering they had more in common than anyone might have expected. Miguel was teaching some of the guests basic salsa steps, his patient instruction creating more laughter than actual dancing. This was what victory really looked like. Not the moment when Dante admitted he was wrong, but this room full of people from different worlds who'd found ways to connect across their differences. I learned something important that night in the ballroom, and it wasn't about dancing. I learned that the most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to make you feel small is to show up as authentically yourself. Don't shrink to fit into someone else's expectations. Instead, expand their understanding of what's possible. Sometimes the people who challenge us the most end up respecting us the most, but only if we respect ourselves first. And that's a lesson worth dancing for.